Give it a second. Yay! All right, we are live. Thanks everybody for joining us today for Gatsby Web Creators. I'm Caitlin, the community manager here at Gatsby. And Marcy, Aisha, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back for the last session of Gatsby Web Creators, our second series. We've had a couple of weeks off. You know, there's been big world events and the Black Lives Matter movement. We really wanted to give some space for this time. So we're back today for this last session. And Aisha, I'm so glad you're here with me. I wanted to kick things off with a question. What's your favorite flower?
So I thought about this a lot. My grandmother is a farmer. They used to call her house the jungle house because of all the plants. But I think mine is the azalea. It's like also the street that I grew up on, Azalea Ridge. Yeah, I like them.
Pretty. It's hard to choose. There's so many beautiful flowers and the scents always sway me. I guess right now this week, because it's June and my peony plant has popped up, I think I'm going to go with the peonies because I wait around for them all year and then they come and they're big and fragrant. Just really kind of stop me in my tracks when I see those. So I'm going with the peony. Nice. So yeah, now it's summer in this hemisphere. And so we are wrapping up these sessions of Gatsby Web Creators and building creative websites and code. So far in these sessions, we have been working on glitch.com. We're finally going to move away from Glitch. We can use our projects for inspiration and copy bits and pieces of code, but we are going to build something from scratch and finally work into Gatsby and React. So Gatsby is a website generator. It uses the React Vue library, some JavaScript. It will output HTML and CSS into a website that everyone can access. So we're going to learn how to do that, and we will pull in some of our examples from previous sessions. So yeah, what do you like about Gatsby, Aisha?
There are a lot of things that I like about Gatsby, but one is that I'm able to bring in so many sort of disparate sources and pull them into a really cohesive experience for my users.
Love that. Yeah. So when you're building a website, you know, so far we've been working with a lot of static code where we have our text like right in our HTML. And I can even pull up our code from the week 5 session we did back on Intro to JavaScript and the DOM, or the document object model. And we made this little animal friends site with Katie's and Doggos, featuring Bagley the cat and Rainier McChatterton, my personal friends here at my house. And so we really embedded the text directly into our HTML, and that's how a lot of websites are made. The part I really loved about that day, though, was Aisha's emoji grid. we had like the best teamwork because Aisha created this really cute emoji grid with carnivores and herbivores, and then we came back the next week and bound it up with JavaScript. So you can play with these and, you know, apply CSS stuff to these. So how cool would it be if we could port this into a Gatsby site? So that's what we're going to do. And we're really kind of starting at the ground floor with Gatsby. So copying your content in and having it directly embedded in your templates and stuff works great. I think the power of, what Aisha was talking about is being able to pull in content sources, and your content can come from various places. Like if you're working with WordPress or you have an e-commerce website. Aisha did a really great session. I guess it's been a few months now.
Yeah, it's been some time using Snipcart actually to create a shopping cart on your site. And I've also done a couple other variations on e-commerce. So pulling listings in from Etsy or Shopify, wherever you're sort of comfortable working, you can pull those into your site and make your Gatsby site work for you and generate some income.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, and you can really leverage that functionality of, I mean, building your own shopping cart could be fun, but I mean, a lot of people don't have time for that. And also if we're doing, creating sites for businesses that are rebuilding or creating a side hustle for yourself or for a friend or family member or something, having a website platform that can interface with something like Shopify or Etsy, you could make that kind of dream of selling stuff online and being an independent business more of a reality with some of these skills. So lots of possibilities. It's pretty exciting. So let's take our first steps into this Gatsby universe. What is that all about? So we're going to take the content from this week 5 Intro to JS and DOM project that we did. And if you want to follow along, I have kind of 2 directions. There is the completed project you can find on the Gatsby JS GitHub account, and I think there should be a link being dropped in the chat. So this is the completed project. Hopefully we can get it looking somewhat similar because we're going to code it from scratch. But you can poke around in here, and you can even go back and look at all of the code from all of the sessions, including that week 5 Intro to JS and DOM. That code was ported from Glitch. So Glitch has all of these projects where we worked live, and then we copied the code over to GitHub, which is a platform for sharing code. We use it to build Gatsby itself, the framework, and it's free. You can make an account for yourself and put all of your code projects, I guess, little ones, big ones, all across the board. GitHub's pretty awesome. And you can kind of make the most of it wherever you are at. If you're new, it can be really useful to get your code online so you can see a progression, kind of go back and look at how far you've come. That's pretty cool. But this week 9 Intro to Gatsby and React, that's the completed one. And then I've created a new repository on my own GitHub that we're going to add code to this. So I guess the first step, where would I start completely from scratch? I would recommend pulling up the Gatsby documentation. So gatsbyjs.org/docs. There are all kinds of learning materials here. The quick start is the one I'm going to start with today, but there's also a full tutorial that goes step by step through everything. In our recipes section, there are a bunch of little short tutorials, like really short, actionable steps of how to work with various things in Gatsby. And then the reference guides has a wealth of material on all kinds of different things like hosting, working with images, how to pull in content from these various sources that we've talked about, like WordPress or Etsy. But the quick start, I think, will get us up and going of installing the Gatsby CLI, which I already have installed on my machine. But some prerequisites for working with Gatsby would be installing Node.js on your computer. And the tutorial walks you through a lot of this. But once you have Node and NPM, you can install the Gatsby CLI globally. And what that means when you have it installed globally is then you can start a new project, any folder on your computer, and the CLI will be available for you. And so from that point, I am going to, let's see, how do I want to do this? The quick start talks you through creating a new Gatsby site. And so let's go and do that. There's a couple different ways you could do this. I was considering creating it, building it up without the CLI, but I think for mimicking what you would be doing when you go and create your first site, let's use the CLI. So I am going to open up my terminal, and I'm going to make this a little bigger. So the terminal is a command line interface that you can feel like a hacker on your computer. Love working with the terminal. It's the best. I'm using iTerm on a Mac. There's also in your utilities folder, there is a terminal application. That'll work fine. If you're on Windows, you might want to look into something called Git Bash. And there are various ways of working on Windows and other, I think Linux, you can do stuff too. So I have a sites directory on my computer. I am going to cd or change directory into a Gatsby directory because I try to put all my related things in a folder. And in here, I'm going to type Gatsby new, and I guess I'll call this Gatsby WC for web creators. Let's just call this new-site. So Gatsby new is the CLI command. Gatsby WC new site is this name that I'm giving it. And that will be the name of the project, the directory it will create. And I'm going to leave the rest blank. So that means Gatsby will go and grab what's called the default starter. So a default site, it'll pull it down. But I can supply a different starter. So if I wanted to follow, Aisha's tutorial from a previous session and work with Snipcart, I could supply a starter URL, but I'm going to go with the default. So I'll hit enter. And the CLI is going and grabbing the default starter. It is pulling the code down and installing dependencies. So Gatsby has other code that it relies on for things like building the site with Node, which we saw in our last session. I guess, how long ago was that? A month ago?
Yeah, it's just about.
A little more? Yeah. So our last session, which you can find on Twitch and on YouTube, I guess after a while it'll be only YouTube, but we talked through Node and kind of working with packages for the first time to lead up to this process. So that's how Gatsby builds websites on your computer. It uses these packages using Nodejs. And what's really cool about that is Gatsby will assemble your website into these built files. So you can deploy them and it loads really fast. It's not, relying on a server or a database to load your website when people visit it. It's these small static files. So this install is done. I'm going to cd for change directory into my new folder, Gatsby WC-new-site. And right now I can run Gatsby develop, and that will run a development process on my computer just locally. So only I can see this right now. And I guess all of you are looking at my screen, but it won't be exposed to the internet yet. So Gatsby is building this development bundle. And depending on how much you've got going on, like how big your Gatsby site is, if it's going and hitting WordPress site somewhere, it can vary how long that build will take. But it's telling me now I can now view this in my browser at localhost port 8000. And if I hold my command key on the Mac and hover over this link, it gives me a little shortcut to open it. So we already have our first Gatsby site. All I did was use the command line so far. That's pretty awesome. So it's got the default styling with this purple header and the little space butler guy. Pretty awesome. So we've got a site. That didn't take much effort at all. Thanks, Quick Start. So I'm going to go back here to the terminal. I'm going to do Control-C to kill off this server because I want to go make changes, and then I'll probably restart it. Gatsby does do hot reloading, which is called when you make changes to files, it will automatically load it in the browser. So you don't always need to kill off the development process, but that's what I did. So I'm going to open up that project. I've got this Gatsby new site. I'm going to open it up in VS Code, Visual Studio Code. And on my Mac, so I've grabbed this folder with my trackpad and I'm going to drag it over onto my dock, onto Visual Studio Code. And I've got this project open now, which is pretty cool. And let's take a little tour. Let's see what's in here. So from this default starter, the first file I've opened is called package.json, which in our last Node session with Aisha, we saw what package.json files are. It's sort of a command center for modern websites. And Gatsby pulled down this starter default and it installed all of these dependencies. So it's got Gatsby, something called Gatsby image, a couple of plugins that we may or may not use at this point. But this is a pretty minimal set of dependencies and code from the default starter. the first thing I'm going to do is go and change this name. So I'm going to say Gatsby WC. I could make it match my folder name, maybe this new site. And there's a couple of things in here. The description, I might just leave that the same. This file is mostly used like if you're going to publish your website or something, or if you're creating a code package and you want to distribute it, that's when this file becomes really important in terms of the name and description and author. Kyle Matthews is the creator of Gatsby. That's why his name is in here. There are some interesting things in here I will point out, like the scripts at the bottom, which we saw in our node session. Scripts are things that we can run from the command line using npm. So one of them we've run the Gatsby develop command so far. I could also here in VS Code, I can open a terminal in the editor, which is cool. I do control the backtick on my keyboard, and it will open this terminal inline, which is cool. So we ran Gatsby develop to run this npm script. It is an alias. I could say npm run develop. That's synonymous. And so these scripts, you might not need them right away, but as you add, different processes, maybe you get into automated testing and you want to run some tests, scripts can become handy.
And you can combine those. You can combine different scripts and use that shorthand, so npm run, and then whatever name you've given that script to run whatever you need. The other part of this file that you're going to use fairly often, especially if you're sharing a project, if you're working on a project with other people, is the list of dependencies that Marcy pointed out earlier. So we talked about how Gatsby automatically installed our dependencies when we grabbed that starter, that default starter. And so these are the dependencies now that we've already got installed into our project, which are held in that node modules folder in the log here. So all of those are listed in there. And if you wanted to, you could pick through the code and see actually what you are depending on. But this is also where npm is going to look when you go to install dependencies in the future. So let's say you wanted to work on this project on another computer, you can clone your project from GitHub, run npm install, and that process will look at this list of dependencies and use those names and numbers, which are the versions of your dependencies, to get you all of the right stuff so that you can continue working.
Yes. And even we got a question in our last session about, or maybe it was the last one, about semantic versioning and what that meant. And these are examples of it right here. A caret, and then the 2.4.8, for example, for this version of Gatsby image. And semantic versioning is a sort of numbering mechanism to indicate what changed. So was it a patch? Was it a minor change or a major change? So the 2 in 2.4.8 would be a major, the 4 is minor, and then the 8 would be a patch. So it's really a way so that when people are depending on your code, that if you push a breaking change, like if the way people call your code completely changes, you need to tell them, and have a system for upgrading so that you don't just like break everyone's stuff all the time. It makes it a little more dependable. So that's what all these numbers are. And we could maybe, if you have more questions about versioning and this kind of thing, we're going to be doing some more live streams, including some office hours. And we could do kind of like a Q&A stream where we could go specifically into whatever questions you have. So get in touch with us if that's something you'd like to do. Because what I'd like to keep going on is more of our tour here. So our next file after package.json is the Gatsby config.js file. So Gatsby config, while package.json is sort of a command center for modern websites, Gatsby Config is the Gatsby specific command center, and they work together. They're both really helpful for Gatsby projects. But Gatsby Config is where Gatsby will go and pull information from to actually put in your site. So some things that we've even seen so far, the Gatsby default starter title, that's where this comes from in this header. It's pulling it from this site metadata object. So in Gatsby config, the format is this module.exports equals and then an object with these curly braces. And we've seen objects so far in our, we went from kind of 0 to 60 with beginner HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And we've seen some of these structures before, including objects with curly braces, these sort of key value pairs, like site metadata is the key, and then the value assigned is this object. And then it has, child key value pairs. We've seen these backticks, which are string literals. You could use regular quotes in place of those, but we've seen those before. Let's see what else. Here's an example of this string literal with this directory name. Dir name is a variable that's being escaped. So it's not a literal string in here. It's wrapped in this $ curly braces. And so that will substitute whatever the directory name is for your project. It will slot that into the rest of this longer string for this image path here. So it's cool to see the little bits and pieces that we've talked about so far. You can find them in code that you pick up, including the Gatsby's default starter. So I'm going to change this site metadata title to, let's say, Gatsby Web Creators. And in the description, I could say, let's see, our first Gatsby site. And I'm going to do Command S. So there's some plugins in here that we can use. Gatsby plugin React Helmet is a tool for us to get control of the HTML head. And we're going to go take a look at our first React file here in a moment, and you'll see how that comes into play. But we're moving away from static HTML and CSS and JavaScript into React. And so React is a JavaScript library that's used in a lot of big web applications and websites. Gatsby uses it in a really neat way in that we're writing JavaScript and we can do really powerful things with it. But it will build out HTML files for us using Node, and it'll use that build process. So it's pretty cool having that at your disposal. And it's really neat to use it to its fullest potential and make really interactive websites. And when we pull in some of our creative code, it is really nice to have this space where we can have web pages output, but we have this interactive layer that we can work with in JavaScript. So this is also pulling in, if we want to put images on our website, this will grab them from, so there's a source directory and an images folder inside of it. And so Gatsby source file system is telling Gatsby that there are images in there that you should make available so that then we can pull them in if needed. Gatsby Transformer Sharp and Gatsby Plugin Sharp are kind of processing libraries that will give Gatsby image superpowers. We aren't really going to dive into that too much today. That could be a future stream topic, probably.
Yeah, for sure.
We may have even, I think Lori's first stream may have covered that a little bit if you go back on our YouTube channel. Gatsby plugin manifest is a way to have your site turn into a progressive web app, or PWA. So something that's kind of straddling like the web and then a native app. It's sort of the best of both worlds a little bit. And then there is something commented out down here for Gatsby plugin offline, which would make your whole website, I guess that enables the progressive web app and offline functionality. So say you're on an airplane, if we ever get on airplanes again, if you had your site, you'd pulled it up in a web browser. If you had Gatsby plugin offline enabled, you would have this cache that you could then continue to read content and not have that that dang page reload where you're like, oh no, I'm stuck on this airplane and it reloaded and now I can't read my content. Well, if you had Gatsby plugin offline enabled, it wouldn't do that refresh and lose all your reading material that you needed for a 12-hour flight. But I don't think I'm getting on an airplane anytime soon. But sometimes you just don't have a network, and that's nice to be able to work around. So we've got Gatsby Config. I mean, really the parts that we care about right now, the site metadata title, I think that's the one piece we're going to use today. So let's see what else is in here. We have a Gatsby Nodejs file. We're not going to use this right now, but this is useful if, say, you are pulling in content from WordPress and you have blog posts and you don't want to create a template for every blog post. You want it to be more dynamic. Gatsby Node is a way to write the code that will like programmatically go over all your blog posts, hook them up to a template, and do that kind of fancy dynamic stuff. Gatsby SSR is for Gatsby server-side rendering. You know, I haven't actually needed this file in working with Gatsby for a year and a half now. There are some use cases where maybe you want to do something on the server, like when Node.js kind of builds your site, there might be specific things you want to do. I haven't needed it, so I'm actually going to delete this file, because if we aren't going to use it, we can...
I've seen that file used far more often in plugins. So if you're wanting to build a plugin for Gatsby, you might have more reason to use that file.
Got it. Yeah. So building plugins, maybe themes or something, which are a type of plugin. So I just deleted those files. There is one more here, though, the Gatsby browser file. And this one I am going to keep around. So, and really we're talking about like the server versus the browser. And so far in Web Creators, we've spent a lot of time in the browser and talked about browser JavaScript and CSS and things that when we look at a website, we are seeing browser stuff. It may have been assembled, you know, depending on how the site was made, there might be some server backend processes to get it to like the point we're seeing it. But all the code right here, this is all front end code, so browser code. But in Gatsby land, the backend kind of server part is done with Node.js, and it's really this build step. And we build the site, you know, we saw Gatsby do the development version of that. But the way Gatsby works is it will run this build step, compile everything, and then we upload those built files to a server. And so they're really fast, you know, like I mentioned, we're not hitting a database, we're not using PHP or anything. Like it builds these static files. And then, you know, browser code, that's really what we're outputting. So in Gatsby browser, I can do things like pull in a style sheet. I'm going to pull in a font. So were you going to say something, Aisha?
Yeah, so we actually have a question from Taylor C. Johnson in the chat. Yeah. And it's, do Gatsby starters ever update their dependencies in package.json? And if so, is there a Gatsby way of updating them? So yes. We talked just briefly about plugins and themes. So the purpose of a starter is to be a starting point. It is a fully functioning website that you copy and then use that sort of as a jumping off point. Conversely, you can do something like use a theme in your project, and that is being updated theoretically. It may or may not be, depending on the theme you use. But a theme is sort of a package that encapsulates some kind of site functionality. And you are able to upgrade your themes, which you install as dependencies. And that is a type of Gatsby plugin.
And I will point you to a page, a doc that I wrote in the last couple of months on the gatsbyjs.org website. In the conceptual guide, there is a doc called Plugins, Themes, and Starters. And it talks through kind of what all these differences are, what the use cases are, like why would you use one or the other? And so we pulled down a starter. A starter could pull in a theme, and a theme is a type of plugin. So if you had a theme on your site, it would be in this package JSON file as a dependency. And so we won't really be using themes today. We're using a starter. So when we make changes to this, we have like forked it from the original starter. And so to get updates, it is a bit of a manual process. So the command I usually run is npm update, and that will go and fetch any updated dependencies. It factors in this semantic versioning, and I think it might not upgrade you to like a breaking or a major update. So you might need to manually say like, no, I want,
I'm sure I know what I'm doing.
React version 10 or 20 or some major release. I think you have to go and do that kind of like npm install React at whatever the newest is if it's a major. But npm update should get you some at least minor and patch updates. But I'm not gonna do that right now. I am going to go install. We had a typeface in our project called Kalam. It's from Google Fonts. So I'm going to run npm install typeface Kalam, and that pulls it from the typefaces project. And that way I can pull that in and load it in my Gatsby browser file. I'm also going to go and create a style sheet. So let's do styles.css. And I'm going to do a bit of a shortcut because I've already... time goes by fast. So on our project on GitHub, I have the styles for this project already done. So I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it in the styles.css. So this is everything from our little animal grid and, well, really both pages of our Animal Friends website. And the formatting might be a little wonky. I like my CSS to be nicely organized, so I might have to come back in and clean this up. But in my Gatsby browser file, I could say import, and I'm going to put in quotes src/styles.css. And I know once this typeface downloads, I don't know why this is taking so long for a typeface, but I'm going to say import typeface -kalam. So there's two little differences I want to point out here. So source style CSS is looking in my local directory here, and npm is smart enough to be able to pull from both your source files and things that you've installed from node modules. And it's pretty seamless. It will do what's called like try to resolve it and look for it. So typeface Kalam that's not something in my source directory. That's coming from my node modules. And so if I reference this, we'll see if it wants me to make this more specific. But sometimes, when you do want to reference something in your source files, if you add a // or if say it's like I'm importing something from a directory and I need to go back a directory to find it. It's sort of the same, when you're working in the terminal and the command line using this kind of directory access syntax, that can be a way to tell npm like, no, that file's in my source directory. And our typeface is done. So I'm going to run a Gatsby develop and just see if our imports worked. See if it complains at me. Yes, it did. It complained about something. I think I know what. Yes. So there's a issue with npm that I know about where when you install something, npm has an issue where it says it can't find React again. Pretty easy trick is to run npm install, and that will fix up whatever this bug is in npm. It's kind of a pain in my butt, but it's pretty easy workaround. It's just something with that first install from the CLI. It loses track. Like, I don't really know why. We've talked about it at length. So let's run Gatsby develop again. And it should work now. What's it complaining about now? Invalid hook call. Oh no. you seen this one before, Aisha?
I have not. Invalid hook call.
I hope this doesn't make me reinstall everything. I've seen this one before too, and I think this is related to the same issue where the CLI tool itself uses dependencies, and then when you try to install it for the project, this can be a huge pain. So what I might do, we might need to go nuclear here. I'm going to do rm-rf node modules, and that will remove everything kind of recursively through my node modules directory in case it just got into a wonky state. And I'm going to run npm install again. It's like that joke about IT, you know, have you tried turning it off and on again?
That's exactly what it's like.
You just have to like delete everything and start over. When in doubt, that's usually how I would make it work. So there are multiple package managers. So npm, I for some reason just have this, it's like a comfort blanket, but it's buggy and causes problems. So some people prefer what's called yarn. And this even could be an issue where like I've used yarn for some Gatsby projects and I'm trying to use npm. Could be related to that. So it's helpful to stick with one. And in our docs, there is a doc on how to switch between. If you go to the Gatsby command line docs, there is a bit here on how to change your default package manager in case you end up with the wrong one. It's the problem with having multiple package managers is they're both so useful. Sometimes you end up with both and it causes issues. All right, so that went through and reinstalled everything. Hopefully.
And we did get a question of what node version are you using?
I am on, so I'm going to do node-v. I'm on node 12. So Gatsby does require node 10 or higher. And I use a package called N. And with N, you can install multiple node versions. This might be an issue with my imports. Let's see if maybe I blew away my node modules for nothing. No, what's going on with this today? Man, maybe I might try one more thing. And I'm going to laugh if this is it, but I can delete node modules and this yarn.lock file because I think it might be related to the fact that I've used both. Because see, there's package lock and yarn lock.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and I did this wrong. I'm going to do rm yarn lock. And now I'm going to do npm install. Yeah, sticking with one package manager is really the key here. And because I work on Gatsby itself, I have both. So the CLI might be a little confused. Hopefully you don't run into this if you're using one package manager. I'm really giving my computer a workout today. see how this works. So we got to make good use of this time. So I'm going to keep doing our porting over of our website. So I'm going to go back to our project. And we will do a bit of a shortcut here by looking at the README at this project. We can see all of the important files. So we've looked at the package JSON, the Gatsby Config, Gatsby Browser. We have 2 pages. So let's dive into pages. I'm going to go into source. Let me get over here. Source. So we have pages and components. So pages can pull in components. Components can be reused throughout pages. You can have all different kinds of components. So for index, this is going to be our home page. I'm going to go and copy this code. And in pages, there already is an index file. It's the one that we saw already. I'm going to do Command A and Command V, and I'm going to paste everything in here. And so to look at the structure of this, when we had our HTML content, it was mostly the contents here. And I'll hide the sidebar so we can see. So we've got a div class name of homepage. And I took this pretty directly from the stuff that we'd been working on week 7? Week 5? And let's see, the only things I had to change kind of in the guts of this code. So when you reference a CSS class in native HTML, in React, which is, so this is a templating language called JSX is what we use in React. And the one thing I had to change here was from class to class name. And that's because JSX in here, this is HTML kind of made super powerful with JavaScript. And so we're taking that HTML content, wrapping it in a JavaScript function, which is amazing because we can do really dynamic things. So this code does export default function, and it has this named function called home for our home page, and it will return our HTML content. But what's really neat about JSX is that you can use components. And so this layout component, that's not an HTML tag. That is, it's got a capital L, and at the top I have import layout from /component/layout. So that's going from the pages directory back a directory to source. It goes into components and it looks for this layout component. And so layout is a way for me to wrap things in my HTML and make it a bit reusable. So in this project, I already have a layout file done. I'm going to grab it for time's sake. And I'm hitting this raw button on GitHub so I can get just the raw code. And so this layout component, I'm going to replace what came with the default starter. And this part looks similar to our page component. So we've got export default function layout. So this is creating a JavaScript function called layout. We are dynamically passing in any contents. So the usage of this, we have this layout. We call it kind of like an HTML tag, but it's this dynamic name that we're pulling in as a component. And then layout has these contents, these child elements. So when we define it, we want to make sure we can pass those in. So layout will take children. Down here, it is returning markup. And so that's a way that we can get the superpower with our JavaScript and our HTML. They combine to do amazing things. And that means we can do dynamic stuff in here, like making what's called a GraphQL query. And we could do a whole stream just on this GraphQL part. So if this is brand new, bear with us. We will talk through it. But we've got this use static query. So that will make a GraphQL query. And what's really neat about Gatsby is we get this data layer for anything that we've pulled in. So from config, we've got site metadata with our title and our description. If I had, let's say we've talked about WordPress and Etsy so far, if I had pulled those in as content sources and kind of hooked them up here in my plugins and everything, they would become like information that's part of that, like say my WordPress posts or, my Etsy products and things. I could query for those and get, things returned using this data layer. So far, I'm going to use site metadata and the title coming from Gatsby Config. And once I've made that query in this layout component, I can reference it dynamically in my template down here. So I've got in the curly braces, so data is this object that I've returned from my GraphQL query. And then I can chain these objects. So it's data.site.sitemetadata.title. That's pretty awesome. So that if I change my title in my Gatsby config file, say I've got it, sprinkled throughout my website. If I wasn't doing it this dynamic way, I'd have to go and find every single instance of that text, which if your site is sizable, it could be kind of a, hunting around trying to find all these references. Whereas if it was dynamic, I could reference it in one place, change it in one place. So that's pretty cool. And otherwise, this code is very similar to what we had on our glitch project. I have swapped out the contents of the main element with a reference to child elements. So in these curly braces, I have children. That is the same as this children that I'm passing into our layout component. So I'm going to hit save. So back in our index file now, when I call this layout, it's going to use that layout component to wrap everything. And yeah, keeping in mind this one gotcha with the class name, because class is actually a reserved word in JavaScript. You can make a JavaScript class. So to work around that, they made this sort of special class name, but it will output to native HTML of a div with a class of homepage. And that will match our CSS that we've pulled in over here. So there were some other files that came with the starter, like this layout.css. We're not using that, so I'm going to delete it just to make things less confusing. I'm also going to delete this header because we're not using that. I'm not using this image file, so I'm going to delete that. I'll probably delete this page too. I don't need that. It came with some other files that you could either customize. I'm just going to clear them out of here because we're not going to use them. We did, however, have one other page, and that was our animal grid. So I'm going to
forget the animal grid.
The most important part. So we've got our animal grid. It is a page component. So in Pages, I am going to create a new file, and I'll call it animal-grid.js. So when I make this page, Gatsby is going to pick this up as a page component, and it will create a page at /animal-grid.
And that's true kind of across Gatsby sites. When you put a JavaScript file like this in your pages directory within your source directory, Gatsby is going to use that file to create a page.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sort of similar to, regular websites, index is the homepage. So it will, if you have mysite.com, the index file is going to be your homepage. So you don't need to do mysite.com/index. The server knows that's the homepage. So things with actual names like Animal Grid will be a page called Animal Grid. So I pasted in this Animal Grid page component, and this code here at the top is a React version of the JavaScript that we wrote in our glitch project. So in this project, I'm going to go back over here to glitch, go edit project, and we had this hot script. So really the differences here, this was native JavaScript. So we were doing a lot of querying the HTML document and passing in CSS classes and IDs to get a hold of, let's put this over here, go to the animal grid. So these are references for these buttons, these emoji grid controls. And they were controlling things like the grid of emojis down here. And there was a click listener here, and sort of all of this code that we wrote to manipulate this user interface and reset it. So in React, this is all in one file now. And really the differences here are that instead of querying everything, I can put a click event in the React way, the React syntax. I can say onClick, and then I pass in a function. And this is an anonymous arrow function that will call animate and pass in the text of scale. So animate is up here. It's const animate equals, and then a function. And this class name is that string that I'm passing in. So I made this sort of reusable, so you can call animate from any of these buttons and pass in the specific class name, and it will set that. And this is using what's called React hooks. There's a use state hook, and it's kind of magical that this works with this little amount of code, which is why I love React, because once I kind of wrap my mind around going from very manual, DOM query, document.query selector, add event listener, all of that JavaScript, I find React really concise, especially for these kind of user interface, interaction type things. So I've got clickable buttons. Down at the bottom, we've got our grid. And the grid is listening for this animation class. And if there isn't one, it'll just leave it off. But React is always kind of like listening for changes, and it will, anytime the state changes, it will re-render with that class applied. So instead of manually appending the class or removing it, React is dynamically kind of paying attention to the state, and it will update it. It's like really awesome. So it's a little bit easier. You have to get used to the syntax, but it's less code to manage with events and state. And so it's really powerful way to go. So we've got our buttons. I think if I run this now, let's see if our pesky React hooks issue went away. What is this about? You're killing me.
We had a suggestion in the chat, and I slacked you an issue that sounded relevant. But the comment in chat was delete node modules, yarn lock, and package lock, and then rerun npm install.
Yeah, you know what? I didn't delete the package lock file. So yeah, let's do that. I'm going to do rm-rf node modules && to chain commands, and I can do rm package lock.json. Yeah, I only deleted the yarn one. So sometimes the package manager gets in this state, and I really try not to criticize npm, but I have seen this happen a lot with npm. So let's run npm install. Hope this works. I mean, this is not ideal, but we'll make it work. We're so close.
So close.
Like 8 minutes. And if worst comes to worst, I have another project we can pull up. I don't know that we're going to get time to deploy this website today, but getting it up and running locally in an hour is pretty awesome. Like that's like amazing timing anyway. And we can, tell you what to do next to get it deployed out on the internet using Gatsby Cloud. But I really want to get this running so we can see our transformation from HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all separate into the Gatsby and React version of this. Yeah, sometimes this issue happens, sometimes it doesn't. It's kind of the way the wind blows. Definitely want it to be more stable. And once you have your project kind of set up, you should be fine after that. I think my issue on my machine, again, is just that I had yarn and npm, and I think it may have gotten confused. So using one or the other can hopefully make this a little easier.
Someone in the chat is also saying, in general, checking whether you have multiple React versions in the log file is also one, can also help diagnose what's happening. Yes. All right, let's see.
Oh, might work. Oh, that did work. Nice. Thank you, Twitch community. Yeah, so I was so close before. I had deleted the yarn lock file because I was like, I'm not using yarn. It was the package lock file. So yeah, it is, npm has this weird issue. I mean, if you just used yarn for everything, maybe it wouldn't have this problem. So maybe this will, I just wish there was one package manager that worked for everything and we just didn't have to worry about it. But let's check this out. Oh yeah. So we've got Bagley the cat. I had commented out the style sheet. So I'm going to go back to Gatsby browser and put our typeface. So here it says can't resolve source /styles.css. So I think it is wants that reference to, so this did need a / to tell it that it's in, relative to where this Gatsby browser file is. That will look in the current directory in source and then styles. So now if I go over here, check that out. We have successfully ported our project from Glitch over here. I'm going to go over to Animal Grid. And if I click these little buttons, they work. That's so great. I love this so much. And it really, I mean, the changes sort of going back over to React. I mean, the bulk of the porting is getting it from that, kind of separate HTML and JavaScript separate files, getting it into the React, syntax and everything. And so what I tend to do, starting with a page component, like the starter installed. This is a really simple one. This 404, like if you try and hit a page that doesn't exist, Gatsby will load up this 404 page. Looking at the structure of this is like the most bare bones page component out of them all. And so what I tend to do is, grab one like this, and then I put my contents in that I'm porting over. And then you can have React will complain at you if you have things you need to change, and you can kind of work through them. But the things that you're likely to hit are like this class to class name, trying to call JavaScript. Like I had to change my JavaScript from all those document.query selector add event listener calls into this inline on click. And I wrote, these little functions to apply CSS classes. So you're welcome to, reference this code. There is also on the Gatsby docs, there are some porting. Let me see, under reference guides, there's a porting to Gatsby section, and there is one on porting an HTML site to Gatsby that you could check out. And that'll talk through kind of a bigger website migration. So that could help. And yeah, so we've got something working here, I guess, to talk about deploying this.
Yeah.
So, and if there's any questions too in our last couple of minutes.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on the chat. If you think we have time, we could probably get there. And if it's helpful, I can narrate while you type.
Sure. Yeah.
Awesome.
So the first thing I did in this project, I stopped my development server and said git init, and I've already created a GitHub project. So we're going to use Gatsby Cloud. I'm going to use this GitHub project. So I did git init. We've got a README. I haven't updated the README, but that's okay. So I'm gonna, let's see, I'll fix that. Let's grab a README real quick. I don't know how much that really matters, but.
Yeah. And I think you should have a README. Oh, but you already wrote it out. Look at you.
Yeah, I like updating it so it's not the default starter one.
Yeah.
Okay, so I need to go over here. I'm going to do this in the terminal. I'm going to say git status. So I've got all of these files in here. It got that yarn lock. Oh, deleted yarn lock. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I've got these things. I'm going to do git add period, hit git status again, and I can see in green now it's got all of these files. I'm going to say git commit -m, first real commit, whatever I want to say. So now it has made a git commit of everything of the code at this stage. And I need to hook this up to my GitHub repo. So I'm going to copy this line, git remote add origin, and then it will point it to my GitHub. And then the next thing is this git push u origin master. That will push it to my my origin or my GitHub repo to the master branch, and it'll track it with that -u. So now if I go over here to GitHub and refresh, I have all of these files. And I'm going to copy this URL name. Okay, so on Gatsby Cloud, try and see how quickly we can get this going.
You got this, Marcy.
It's gatsbyjs.com/dashboard, and I already have an account, so you can create a Gatsby Cloud account. It's free for personal projects. So I'm going to say create new site. I already have a Gatsby site, but if I wanted to do something from a starter, I could do that here. I'm going to say it's this repo name, Gatsby intro React. I'm going to publish the master branch, and I'm going to create this new site. It's looking to see if there's any integrations or anything like a CMS, but there aren't. I'm going to skip this step because we've already got everything we want to publish. I don't have any environment variables, but if I wanted staging and production or something like that. So it is building my project right now. And once it's built, then I can set up hosting, or I can view it. I could set up hosting now in the interest of time. So we've got some integrations here. I'm going to choose Netlify. So I'm going to go connect this Netlify integration. That's what I use for my personal website. I'm going to hit authorize. So I already have a Netlify account. If you don't already, it'll prompt you to make one. I think this should have auto completed. I'm going to put this on my own Netlify team. So I could say Gatsby WC intro Gatsby React. So that's the name of my site. And go and create. So it is connected. So now I could look at preview, see what's going on. Let's go see what's going on with this build. I think it's still building. Hopefully it works. It worked locally, so that's always important. Like, make sure it works locally. This first build, sometimes like the first build can take some time as it installs dependencies, and then it caches everything and should go really fast after that, especially since this is a pretty small site. Let's see what's going on here. It is updating. See what happens. And you can use incremental builds. That's a thing where if you have content changes, it will, like, you know, incrementally build it instead of rebuilding the whole thing. So that's a new part of Gatsby Cloud.
The idea being that your builds then get even faster. So you go through this first build, you get it going, and then subsequent builds, Gatsby builds are going to be Gatsby Cloud builds out there are going to be even faster. Now with incremental builds, if you make a change to your content, so let's say you're editing in WordPress and you make a change, then that change is going to be able to happen even quicker.
Nice. Yeah, we're kind of at the mercy of installing these dependencies that first time. But once they're, you know, installed, and, you know, that always takes a set amount of time. You're kind of the network, you have to go and install things. But those don't need to be installed every time. So that's where you can really get some speed increases on your installs and builds. So the subsequent builds after that first one are almost always faster. Assuming you're not, like, you know, changing so much that it's like has to invalidate the cache because there's, like, you know, all the plugins changed or something. But yeah, this is really exciting. I'm excited. This is gonna, like, hopefully have a live site. And I do have a version of this that is already built out, so I know it works. But it's really cool to be able to take code and port it over. And so we really just kind of like breezed through going from HTML and JavaScript, you know, native into Gatsby and React. And there's lots to learn there. So we'll have subsequent streams. We have a ton of learning material. And if there's something that you're like, I really didn't get that part, or I want to learn more about that, get in touch with us, because we have this creative space where we can come and stream it, you know, a couple times a month. And we know we're going to be streaming more. So if there's stuff you want to learn about, let us know.
Absolutely.
Let's see what's going on with this build. I can hit this raw logs button and it'll show me exactly what's going on. Gatsby Cloud is having an issue. What is that about?
Oh,
it built. What happened? Okay, so I do have this preview link now. I don't know why I got an error because it worked. Might have been some flaky network. Look at this. My famous cat and dog are on the internet now, at least at this preview URL. So the Netlify integration, we're in preview. So I want to go and look at my hosting part. Where does that live? I hooked that up. Let's see, site settings. I can go. I am a bit new to Gatsby Cloud.
Sorry, what are you looking for?
My Netlify integration. Oh, here, integrations.
Hosting.
Right in front of my face. So I've got this Netlify connected. I guess what I'm missing is like the URL. I mean, I happen to know that Netlify, isn't it netlify.app now or something like that? Yeah. Oh, there it is. So that worked. So for Netlify, it's the name of your project .netlify.app once it's been deployed. And so that was way easier than I thought. So I have a live site now. So that's super rad because I can have my own custom code. I could do, I mean, really the sky's the limit. Like you can make stuff creatively and then have your own website. With Netlify or really any of these hosting providers, you could also have a custom domain name. So if I wanted, GatsbyWebCreators.com or, famousdoggos.com, now I want to go, oh man, domain names. I gotta go buy another domain name. But you could use a custom domain if you wanted to get the netlify.app part out of here. But I was able to get a website up for free in an hour. And that's pretty powerful. So
for sure.
So yeah, we did it. Virtual high five. So yeah, with that, I mean, we have a site, and if you want to go look at the code again, it's over here on GitHub. You can see everything that went into this. It might be, I built this one from scratch without the CLI, so it might be a slightly different, like it's a little more lean, but all the stuff is otherwise the same. So yeah, that's our last session for Gatsby Web Creators. We went all the way from beginner HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I mean, let's marvel at all of this stuff that we did in 9 weeks with a bit of a break in the middle. We went from like complete newbie, like this is what HTML and CSS are, to building a Gatsby site, and that's a pretty impressive progression. So absolutely. I want to thank you all for following along, and if you're interested in web development, you can do it. You can make stuff. It's all there for you. There's a ton of free services and free tools. So find your niche and find the languages, programming languages that suit you best and serve your needs. It's all good and it's all fun, and you can do really neat things and maybe even make a career out of it. That's what we did. So thanks for joining us, and get in touch with us if there's things you'd like to learn more about, because we'll be here streaming, from here on out. So yeah, thank you to our captioner, and yeah, thanks Aisha and Caitlin for joining me on the stream.
Yeah, totally. And if you don't already follow us on Twitch, now is a great time to do that. You'll get notifications when we go live. And if you missed any of our past web creators, they are all on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/GatsbyJS. So you can catch up and work on your development skills. And please do let us know if you have topics that you'd like us to to dig into, and we'll see what we can do. So thanks again, everybody. Thank you, Jean, for captioning, and we'll see y'all soon.
See you later.